are listening to the CoastLine Candidate Interviews. I'm Rachel Lewis Hilburn. The city of Southport sits at the convergence of the Atlantic Ocean and the Cape Fear River. The U.S. Census Bureau puts the population at about 3,800 people. Two people are hoping to be its next mayor, the same two who faced off in 2015 and again in 2017. Challenger Joe Pat Hatem is a native of Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, and a medical doctor who practices at Southport's Dozier Memorial Hospital. It was 30-something years ago, he says, that he started moonlighting in Dozier's emergency room while doing his residency at New Hanover Regional Medical Center. Joe Pat Hatem, welcome to CoastLine.
Thank you, Rachel. Great to be here.
You've run now. This is your third time running against Mayor Jerry Dove. Why is it so important to you to be mayor? Is it about beating Mayor Dove?
No, I don't think it really has anything to do in particular about beating Mayor Dove. I'm running for the people of Southport. After I lost in 2017, people came to my home in January of 2018. I mean, just the election had barely over, and they said, "We want you to run again in 2 years." People intermittently in 2018, "We want you to run." I would say, "Well, I have my signs. I saved them. I didn't throw them away." Or they say, "Are you going to run again?" I say, "Sure. It's a hobby by now. I've already run twice." And so after this past year, when city government had created such distress within the city, and in particular with the citizens, more and more people came up to me to ask me to run.
What do you mean that city government created distress with the citizens?
It started at the workshop in January. The city had decided to sell a piece of property, the old sewer plant, and not much information had been given to the citizens. They did not understand the process, and they wanted to have public comment at the workshop. And citizens are raising their voices at aldermen, and aldermen are raising their voices at citizens. It was an embarrassing spectacle.
How could you? I know one of the proposals that you've made on your website is raising the minimum time limit for citizens to speak at public meetings to encourage more public input. And of course, 5 minutes instead of 3. Is that what you're talking about now?
Yes.
So on the face of it, that sounds great. But you get a few citizens in the room who all get to speak for 5 minutes, and you could be sitting there for 2.5 hours easily just listening to people repeat the same things. Is that manageable for a public meeting? I should say a regularly scheduled Board of Aldermen meeting.
Absolutely. I think the importance of letting the people speak, I mean, it is crucial. Our meetings are too short. That's the other thing. An alderman meeting can be done in 40 minutes. I don't know how you do the business of the city in 40 minutes. And in my work, I want to give everyone the information that I have, and I want them to understand. I want to educate, and I want to hear everything about them. And it takes time. The difference is in a meeting, I don't have to make a decision right away. In the ER, I've got to make a decision. I may have 30 seconds. Here, the luxury of listening to the voices of the people and taking the time to educate and getting it right, and then you don't have the discourse. I will sit there all evening, be happy to.
Now, so I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I think that's easy to say, and it's easy probably to even feel that way before you get into it. And I'm playing devil's advocate here because people have raised all kinds of ideas about increasing citizen input. But when you're dealing with a situation where you feel like your experts, your consultants have done, say, an economic analysis on an issue and determined that it's best, and I'm going to ask you about the wastewater treatment
Absolutely.
plant later, but, best, say, to phase out of an agreement with Brunswick County because this is the in-depth analysis that's been done, and you have to listen to people talk from their emotions and not offer facts, really, to illuminate the analysis of the facts. I mean, you're a doctor, so you're constantly looking at facts and analyzing facts. Can you see where it gets difficult for public officials to listen to the same emotional argument person after person?
Well, let me give you one fact concerning the sewer plant. They chose to put it in the backyard of a community off of Bethel Church Road. I don't think anyone wants a sewer plant in their backyard. And this created a wellspring of pushback from that community, and they have a right to do that. And so in terms of getting the facts, yeah, they had the facts that they chose to put it there, and look what happened. And so
you're saying the emotional reaction
it
is
was based
warranted.
on fact. That was why they were there. Had they not chosen that particular spot, those people wouldn't be there and they wouldn't be emotional, but it was based on fact. And I understand what you're saying, but I will listen, and it will, the power of attrition in terms of once everyone has kind of said the same thing, the other people scheduled to speak will probably come up and say, well, I echo what was just said, or I agree with what has previously been said, or I'd like to add one more thing, but I don't have much to offer after that. So I think it will take care of itself.
A lot of candidates across municipalities have raised the issue of citizen engagement and transparency or lack of transparency as issues in their municipalities. So it's easy to talk about public engagement and getting citizen input and facilitating greater transparency. But other than raising the time limit for people to talk at some of these meetings, what are other ideas you have around transparency and public input?
I favor town hall meetings in addition to our alderman meeting. For example, if I'm elected mayor, you brought up the issue of the sewer. The first town hall meeting would be having the county come in and tell us what it is that you have to offer and why is it better to go with the county than build our own sewer plant. I mean, it's the right thing to do. And if you empower the people with information, they are more inclined to be involved, and they will be satisfied with the decision that's made.
Southport is, of course, phasing out of its agreement with Brunswick County and has decided to move forward, as you've said, to build its own water treatment plant. Do you think it's the right move? Public input aside, is it the right move for Southport to have its own plant?
My decision was not based on public input. It was based on what my training, my education, my experience, and that type of thing. And I firmly believe in medicine we have a regionalization of services. You cannot get a heart cath at Dozier Hospital, and you shouldn't. And so I felt like this is such a big project. We are such a small town. Why would we not sort of band together with other municipalities and go with the county? And that means having a rapport with the county commissioners. And that means sitting at the table and talking with them and making sure that the public knows everything that I know in terms of that decision-making process. It's the process more than anything else.
And that's one of the arguments that we've heard against an independent plant for Southport is economies of scale, and it makes so much more sense to have a centrally run system rather than all the municipalities having their own systems. But there was an analysis that was done that determined equally, it would be equal whether Southport built its own from a dollars and cents point of view versus whether it stayed with the county. The difference is if Southport builds its own, it owns it then. And so over time, it seemed to be a better deal. Do you think that's not true?
First of all, that information was not made in detail and available to the citizens. Secondly, I don't know of any project that comes in at budget or under budget. So they said, well, it costs $26 billion. Well, Oak Island, they had their issue. They thought it would be so many million, and it was many millions more over that. So that's my concern. And the maintenance, what if it floods? I mean, we are in a hurricane belt, obviously. So these are things that concern me, and why I favored going with the county.
How do you think the city of Southport should prioritize the power infrastructure issues? I mean, there are a few that we know of, including the major one, which is there's one feeder line into the city of Southport. And so if that goes out, Southport's out of luck. What's your proposal?
I think, first of all, we need to, and they've been trying to do this, we need to get those power lines buried. I think that would be a major accomplishment and improvement in terms of keeping our power grid open and that type thing. We need to have a close relationship with Duke Power, Brunswick Electric. I mean, the city is responsible for, water, sewer, power. Those are the big three. And I favor sitting down with them before a problem starts. For example, they said, how would you handle a disaster or a hurricane? At the forum, I said, well, in January, I would go ahead and have a mock drill. So I would know. If I win, I would know. And who are the people that need to be in the room? Hurricane is coming. What are the resources that we need to have available? Who do we call? Who is in place? Who at the state level, who we access? And the same with power, and the same with any other, major utility issue.
When you look at what happened with Southport after Florence in 2018 and then Dorian this year, what are some of the lessons that you would want to take if you were elected mayor moving forward for the city?
You have to be pre-positioned. I learned that. I'll give you one example. We were at the hospital and pretty much stranded there for 8 days. I mean, no one could get.
Are you
get
talking
in or
about
out.
Florence?
Yes, after Florence. Yeah. And one of the things we did not have, our air conditioning runs on water. You have to have water in the system. Well, Southport lost water. So we learned that for the next hurricane, you have to pre-position tanks of water on site. So that's just one small part of the process. So I think preparation is the key in that regard.
Is that unusual that Southport city officials didn't know that before 2018?
Obviously, someone knew it because we got the, well, I don't know if it was in Southport, but one of the hospitals in Brunswick County had the tanks, and that's where we got that water from. So I can't criticize on that. I certainly didn't know it, so I can't criticize. Probably should have known, but I certainly can't criticize that.
Based on what you know about the police department now, we know the former chief and lieutenant are facing criminal charges, and they were fired from the Southport Police Department last year. It made national news. It was such a debacle. There had to be other entities helping to take over law enforcement in Southport until some of this got sorted out. The word is generally pretty good about the current police chief. They say people are saying Todd Coring is doing a good job reinstituting principles and bringing integrity back to the police department. But what did you learn from the audit that was done last year after the investigation into what went wrong with the police department?
What I learned from the police department issue, as you call it, the debacle, is that mentoring is crucial to leadership. And in particular, if you're mayor, if you're not mentoring all of your department managers. For example, for me, if I'm elected, my job, one of the many jobs, I will make sure that I'm mentoring our EMS chief. I'll also stay in close contact with Todd Coring and Charles Drew, fire chief. And I think it was just a leadership failure. Here is a young man who was placed in a position as chief of police, and our mayor is a former chief of police of that same town. How could that happen? That's what that was my take.
So are you saying that the fault really is with the current mayor on this one? Can you have changed the trajectory of someone who is willing, as another candidate put it, to lie, cheat, and steal?
No, I'm not putting the blame on anyone. No. You can't. If someone's going to break the law, they're going to break the law. But if you're mentoring someone, if you're trying to develop their character, if you're trying to inspire them, if you're on top of them making sure they're doing their job, then they probably may not have time to get in trouble.
If you win the mayoral seat in Southport, if you get one issue that you get to just have it work out the way you want to see it worked out, what is that one issue? What is the major thing, if you had a free pass, you'd want to see accomplished?
I think the one issue is how, in this change is going to come to Southport, the economy, the development, and that type of thing. How do we keep that quaint village atmosphere, architecture, spirit, while promoting the right type of small business, economic development, and tourism?
What are your ideas around that? Because that is the crux of that's probably the biggest issue facing Southport, according to most of the candidates, is this explosive growth that's happening in Brunswick County. And a lot of the growth is happening on the outside of Southport proper. But what are some ideas for managing that growth?
Well, fortunately, we have a UDO, Unified Development Ordinance, and that helps to spell out certain specifications for builders, developers, and that type of thing. For example, the Wendy's couldn't be in downtown Southport because you can't have a drive-through, for example, or you can't have that type of signage. So, and by the way, it's booming. If you drive by there, there's a long line of cars. So that's good for Southport, and it's out that way. So that's part of it. The CAMA land use plan. The importance of our entry corridor, how it's landscaped, keeping it architecturally in tune with the quaint village. We have got to improve the roads down by the eye basin, get City Dock repaired. These are things. And the courthouse, it's been sitting there, 4 years now since I started running. We have to support entities that are going to help bring that building back to life.
There are rumors that the fire department is installing a sign that will say Southport Fire Department Headquarters. Do you know anything about this proposal and how much it might cost taxpayers? And if so, is it a good idea?
Well, it's right across from the hospital, so it's not a rumor. I've seen them building it. There's a sign there already, and so I've been to a number of the meetings. In fact, most all of them this past year. I don't recall. It may have been on the consent agenda, but I don't recall it even being on the agenda. So, in terms of what it cost and the purpose and things like that, I don't recall having the exact details of that. But I know it's being built right now.
So, as you've said, after a lot of back and forth over this site where the old wastewater treatment plant was, the Southport Board of Aldermen voted to amend the city's Unified Development Ordinance and allow a 5-story unit to be built, dry storage. Some people argue this now has set a precedent for other commercial interests to build structures of a higher elevation there, and this will forever change the waterfront in downtown Southport. Supporters of this text amendment say, actually, There are only 2 facilities there that are able to build this kind of unit, and that's what the amendment allows for. Those 2 spots are taken, so nothing else can change. What would you have done if you were mayor and you could have helped shepherd this through to completion? How would you have approached that? Would you have voted for that text amendment?
You're talking about it to raise the height
Right.
level.
Yes.
Okay. Well, since the mayor doesn't vote unless there's a tie, so there's already a structure there that is 50 feet. And the city sold the property. The planning board did look at it, and it did go through. But it's just for that one specific area. It's not for anywhere else in downtown Southport. And I think it goes to what I've talked about earlier, the process, the education of the public.
So you're saying then just that text amendment will not set a precedent for other interests to do the same thing. You're not. That's not a concern for you.
No, it should not. No, it should not.
So then how would you have handled the process? You're saying that people didn't really understand well enough what was happening in that deal?
Yeah, well, that goes back to the original sale of the property. It was done quickly. There was not a lot of notification. There wasn't public comment. Even though the property's been there a long time, and selling the property to me was not the issue. It's the way in which it was done. Did they receive maximal dollar benefit from the sale? So these are the issues.
Do you think they did?
Well, when they used a comparable piece of land to appraise it, which was not a waterfront property but a property on House Street, and this does have beautiful marsh title, wetland, and that type of thing. They probably could have gotten more money for it.
In a 2007 citizen survey, which I have to say may be obsolete because that's 12 years old, it appears the most important issue to residents is preserving the historic character of Southport, which we've talked about, but 72% said Southport should work to promote affordable owner-occupied housing. Do you agree with that, first of all, that Southport should be facilitating affordable housing?
Southport is a retirement community. And if you look at the real estate just on Bay Street, those homes are now priced at $1.2, $1.3 million. So to say that there's affordable housing in the village of Southport, these are very expensive homes.
Yeah, well, there isn't.
Yeah.
Which is what this was about. Like, should Southport be working to promote workforce housing?
I think there are ways to do it, but I don't know if you could. You just can't do it I don't think you can do it within the village. There's Abington Court off of 211, and there are other developments right outside the city limits that could be used for that.
And that's this edition of the CoastLine Candidate Interviews. Dr. Joe Pat Hatem, thanks for sharing your views.
Thank you.